All right, so we did the top problem in class. Did Margie's conclusion make sense? And remember that we concluded the answer was no, and we wrote down why. So hopefully you had that done as well. So here's our next problem. Moving on. In the after-school club, Dina, Sean, and Amanda knit scarves that are all the same size with yellow, white, and blue yarn. Dina's scarf is 3/5 yellow, Sean's scarf is 2/5 yellow, and Amanda's scarf is 3/4 yellow. The rest of each scarf has an equal amount of white and blue. Describe how Amanda can make the argument that her scarf has the most yellow. Well, if I look at this, my fractions are 3/5 for Deanna, 2/5 for Sean, and 3/4 for Amanda. I'll notice I can't compare the fractions since they are not equivalent. Their denominators are not the same. So remember, to compare fractions, I need to have the same denominator. So I'm going to make my multiples of 4, 12, 16, and 20. And then I make my multiples of 5, and I see which numbers end up being the same. So 5 times 1 is 5, times 2 is 10, times 3 is 15, and times 4 is 20. And I see there are 20. So that means each denominator will be 20. And then I think to myself, how did I get from 5 to 20? Well, that was times 4. So I'm going to multiply this 2 by the same number. Whatever I do to my denominator, I also do to my numerator. I get 8. How did I get from 5 to 20 is times 4. So that's the same thing. Whatever I do to my denominator, I have to do to my numerator. And I get 12. And how did I get from 4 to 20? That was times 5. So I would do times 5. And 3 times 5 is 15. If I look, 15/20 is larger than my others. Since it says describe, I need to also add a sentence. So my sentence can look something like this. I can say Amanda has the most yellow because 15/20, and I'll go back and correct that because 15/20 is larger than 12/20 and 8/20. All right, so hopefully you have that down. I'm going to move this text just so I have more space to work now. So my next question says, how much of Deanna's scarf is blue? So I'm going to look at my problem from up above. Maybe I'm not going to move my text. And it says how much of the scarf is blue. If I look right here, I see I have 12/20, or I can use my original fraction of 3/5. I'm going to do a model for this one to show. So here is my model. It's broken up into fifths. Up here it says that yellow, so I'm going to color 3/5 of it in yellow. And then here's my key where it says it's equal amount, white and blue. So equal amount means one part will be blue and my other part is white, which is already filled in white for me. So if I look now, remember fractions are parts over whole. I have 1 part blue over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 total. So my answer is 1/5. Since it doesn't say to explain, I do not have to explain at all. All right, so now let's go to our next one. It says Deanna's scarf at home has a scarf at home that is the same length as the scarf she made in club. The scarf at home is 6/8 yellow. Deanna said the scarf at home has more yellow. So I'm going to look, they're the same length. So I know I can compare these two fractions and they'll be the same amount. So if this was my first scarf, this would be the second one. And if I remember from my problem, it was 3/5 was yellow. So if I'm drawing a model, it will look like this, and this is my yellow chunk. And then 6/8, so that would be broken into 8s. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. If I notice my parts aren't super equal, so I may end up having to do another strategy. Since they're not super equal, I can see, well, maybe they would have been the same if I had done my model better. So I'm going to use my other strategy. So I have 6/8. I was comparing it to 3/5 to see which one has more yellow. If I know my fractions well, I can actually see that I can simplify this by dividing my numerator and denominator by 2, which would give me 3/4, which is an easier number to work with. And now if I remember, I need to compare these fractions so they now have the same denominator, and then the same fraction I had above, which is 20ths. So how to get from 4 to 20, that was times 5. So I multiply my numerator times 5, gives me 15, times 4 for this numerator and denominator, which gets me 12. And if I look, 15/20 is greater than 12/20. That means the 6/8 has more yellow. So my answer is, was she correct? The scarf at home had more yellow? The answer is yes. Since it doesn't say to explain, I can just leave yes as long as I have my work. So let's look at our next problems on the back, and then we will be finished. So Mr. Aiden's science class had a snail race to see which snail would crawl the farthest from a starting line in 2 minutes. So this shows me how far my snail is. My first part says, Curly and Stylo traveled the same distance. Justify this conjecture, justify this argument, use a number line or fraction strips. So I'm going to look, and I see this is Curly, so I'm going to draw a model, and Curly did 1/5, so that will be 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and he did 1/5 there. And if I look, Stylo did 2/20. If I know my fraction modeling well, I can notice and say, hey, I can split this in half for an equivalent fraction, and here I see 2 parts out of 10. So I see my 1/5 is my red part, and then my blue shows me the 2/10. So I see my fractions are equivalent, and it told me to use fraction strips. So my answer for number 6 is now complete. So let's go on to our next one. Who traveled further, Slimy or Slinky, and explain? So if I look up here, Slinky's traveled 2/12, Slimy traveled 3/12. And I forgot which one traveled. Slimy is my 3/12. So before I forget, since I have to scroll up and down, I'm just going to label this 3/12, and this was 2/12. So my answer, I know 3 is further than 2, so my answer for this one is nice and easy. Slimy traveled further, and I just need that because. And I'm going to say because 3/12 is farther than 2/12. And that is my complete answer. My next one's going to be a little harder though, because it's asked me to compare Creeper and Slimer. And I know Slimy was 3/12. Pause it, so I'm going to go back up and look at Slimy and Slinky. I think I said the wrong one. I'm going to look at Creeper and Slimy. So Creeper I see is 3/8 and Slimy is 3/12. So I'm going to need to find that common denominator. So I had 3/12 and 3/8. So I'm going to check. I'm going to make my multiples of 12, 12, 24. And if I know my multiplication facts well, which hopefully I do, I know it is 8, 16, and 24. So that means my denominator will be 24. And then again, how to get from 12 to 24, that was times 2. Times 2, so that will be 6. This was times 3, since 8 times 3 is 24. And I get 9. So my answer will be Creeper traveled farther. Further, and I'll spell that correctly, because, and then I need to put my numbers in, 9/24 is greater than 6/24. All right, now it's asking me who won the race. So I'm going to do my work up top so I can compare. And here's my hard part. I notice all of these do not have the same denominator. So I'm going to have to use some number sense. I know this by dividing by 2 will be 1/5. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 10 divided by 2 is 5. And I know that, where's my other one? I know that this one, because I just did 3/28, is larger than this one. And if I look at a model, I'm going to use my benchmark fraction of 1/2, and I see 3/8 is really close to a half because it is just 1/8 away. But 1/5 is really far away from a half. If I drew a 1/5 here, that would be 1, 2, 3, 4. See how far it is? So I know I can get rid of that. I also know then stylo is gone. And this slimy 3/12, in order for it to be close to half, it would need to be a 6, which tells me it is very far away. I can also simplify this if I wanted to, divide by 3, and that would be 1/4. And I know 1/4 times 2 is 2/8 for an equivalent fraction, and 2/8 is less than 3/10. So I know it will not be slimy, so I'm left with pod. Now, pod is similar to which one was it? It's similar to stylo because he's kind of far away from being at my halfway mark for my benchmark. I'd have to break it up into fractions, into 10 pieces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and he's only 3 shaded in, whereas my 3/8 is really close. So my answer is creeper. I could also find equivalent fractions with the same denominator and answer it that way as well. So my answer here was 3/8 is correct. And I'm going to check since it says who, so it wants a name, and that was creeper. Which also matches what I had up here too, creeper being the furthest. All right, I hope you guys get your homework done. If you have any questions, feel free to email me.